This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawler of Request and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now.
In a previous episode, Sam, we were chatting about the board's accountability for cybersecurity and the need then for the board to have access to cybersecurity expertise. Since then, we've been comparing notes about views of the world and how a board will achieve this. And you kind of explain it from a board perspective and how you'd interact with the board. And I look at it from a regulator perspective. And actually, there's quite a lot of commonality in how both would approach a review on something like cybersecurity. So what is it then when you work with boards and they're interested in cyber and trying to get a handle on how their delegates approach cybersecurity compliance? What is it that you do? How do you interact with service providers and get everybody on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, where I usually start is you kind of look at this and go, well, how big is the elephant? You know, because there can be a lot of service providers, there can be data, there can be processes in a lot of different places. And what you're trying to get a sense of, well, where is the most important data? Where is the biggest risk, the biggest impact if something was to go wrong? So, you know, how you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So I usually start with an organization and look at their outsourcing register and look at, well, what third-party service providers do they rely on? And look at, well, if a cyber event was to happen in each one of those, what's the likely impact? So given the amount of data they have or the operational procedures that they run for my client, what would be the impact if they had a cyber event? So that's one side of the risk. And then the other side is you nearly do a guesstimate around the likelihood of there being a cyber incident. And it is a guess, but you kind of go, well, if it's a large global organization that does seem to have their act together in this kind of area, you can assess initially, before you verify, you can assess the risk to be relatively low. Whereas if it's a small organization that is only starting out or doesn't have any kind of track record on this, or has demonstrated some kind of gaps in other areas, then you might guess that the likelihood is higher. And you do your standard kind of risk-based approach, look at your risk, look at your impact, and that will start bubbling up of all of the service providers. Which ones should you pay attention to first?
Okay, so that sounds like you kind of survey your universe and then you apply a risk-based assessment to determine of that universe, where do I want to put my resources and my attention? And so it's very similar to how the central bank as regulator would approach something like a thematic inspection. So they will tend to issue a questionnaire to the entire universe. And then once they receive the responses, they will take a sample of the respondents and then will interact with them further to do a deeper dive. So it'll probably be a desk-based review and then a further subset, they will go and do an on-site. And when they come to whittling down from the full universe to the sample, to the smaller sample, they are using kind of risk-based approach. They're looking at their experience with firms and looking for flags to determine where to go next.
Yeah, I mean, like what I would tend to do is when we've identified, let's say, the top 10% that we want to just have a look at, you send them very high-level questionnaires because what you need to find that kind of balance between getting information from them but also getting engagement from them. So if you send them a 200 questionnaire, you know, it hits their radar, they're going to have to get all the experts involved, they're going to have to maybe pull in their own outsourced providers. Whereas if you start asking them very high-level questions about just general things to do with security, you know, how are they dealing with certain types of risks? What frameworks or standards are they aligning to? Ask them things like, you know, questions about ISO standards or cyber essentials or even the central bank guidance, and just see what they come back with. Because if they have their act together, they will be very happy to give you very detailed information on what they're doing. If they give you 1 or 2 line answers, that to me is a sign that maybe they need a bit of a deeper dive.
So you could determine from the quality of answers rather than the quantity whether or not there's something there that merits further investigation or whether they're likely to be a lower risk and therefore you're going to deploy your resources somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, you know, always it's an informed decision that you're making and you could be wrong, but I do find that if someone is doing the right things, they will explain those things to you. If they're not doing the right things, so they haven't thought about these things, their answers are going to be very sketchy, vague, maybe answering a different question, maybe, you know, pointing you towards some area that isn't a risk, just so that you don't see that there is another area that is at risk.
Answering the question that they wished you'd ask them. So then when you work through that, then is there another layer of engagement that you have with firms, and how do you bring that back to the board?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it is an iterative process. You know, you go through the process, you go back to the board with updates on the level of engagement you're getting from different providers, because sometimes you might need some escalations there. But when you get responses, again, you give a more informed view on where the risks are likely to lie. And then you go around again. So you, no different than the central bank with their thematic, and then they do desk-based, and then they start doing on-site. That's where you might start looking to do certain on-site inspections or independent penetration tests or whatever it might be, with organizations where you have concerns, or with organizations where, despite their best efforts, the risk is still quite high.
And then I guess once you've done your assessment, then what are you going to do next? And it might be looking to ensure that your service providers are upping their game, or it might even be changing service providers because you just can't get comfortable that they're doing what you need them to do and there are better options out there.
Absolutely. I mean, more and more, depending on the areas, you will find companies out there that are pitching on the basis of the strength of their security measures. And that's only going to increase.
That's us. That's 6 minutes.
So to sum up.
Well, summing it up from, I guess, from my perspective, looking at it as if I were a regulator, first thing is, as we said at the very outset, border accountable. So it's very important that cyber is on their agenda because it's something that occupies the regulators' minds very much. And it's something that is a real risk and is a real chance for an organization to suffer a failure is around cyber. And the other thing is that when you look at how regulators operate, they always talk about risks and they always talk about risk-based approaches. It's what we have here in Ireland under our supervision system. It's called PRISM. It is a risk-based system. So when you as a firm adopt the same mindset and you're looking at what are your risks and then deploying more of your resources to your higher risks, you're on the same page as the regulator and how the regulator would approach it. And it helps you to build that rapport and trust with your regulator because they can see that your mindset is similar to their mindset.
Okay, and that's 7 minutes. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks very much, Sam.